Now, many people, when they first encounter, at least over the last century, when they have first encountered the problem of free will as I've formulated it, have pointed out that, well, in fact, universal determinism is not true. Why? Well, in the 20th century, because of the work of people like Niels Bohr and many others, we know that the world is not deterministic. It's more of a quantum, indeterministic kind of thing. That is to say, the field known as quantum mechanics tells us that certain events, such as the decay of a radioactive atom, for example, a uranium atom, uranium-238, is going to decay at a certain point, that such events as the decay of an atom are essentially a matter of chance. If quantum mechanics is right, then there is no deterministic basis for why for example, uranium atom decays at one moment rather than another. We know that its decay is very likely to happen over a certain time period, but it seems to be a deep commitment of quantum mechanics that it's not possible to give a deterministic explanation of why that atom decayed at one moment rather than some other. Instead, all that we can say is that there was a certain probability that it would decay within a certain time period. So you might say universal determinism is not strictly true. Does that solve our problem? Does that allow us in good conscience to cast aside the problem of free will because it looks like, after all, we don't live in a purely deterministic world? Well, philosophers have wondered whether that's enough to provide a solution. Perhaps quantum mechanics does not make us free or allow us to see how we're free if we weren't going to be free in a deterministic world. Think about it this way. How could quantum randomness, quantum indeterminacy, make me free if I wouldn't have been free in a purely Newtonian or deterministic world? The philosopher Richard Taylor once wrote, if we were to imagine ourselves as being subject to quantum indeterminacy in a way that one might suggest is what accounts for our freedom, then we'd have to say we're thereby avoiding picturing ourselves as a puppet. That's right, but now we're substituting for that picture one in which it's even less like a human being, a free human being, for the conception that now emerges is not that of a free person, but that of an erratic and jerking phantom, without any rhyme or reason at all. Richard Taylor's idea seems to be the following. If I think of myself as becoming free by virtue of the fact that quantum indeterminacy governs my behavior, then what would be the case? Perhaps that an event in my central nervous system that results in my wiggling of my finger or my bringing a spoonful of cereal to my mouth is an event that's triggered by a quantum phenomenon, for example, the decay of an atom, which quantum phenomenon could not have been predicted by prior events. All that we could have done was make a probabilistic judgment. But if that quantum phenomenon is one that brings about my wiggling of my finger or my eating the spoonful of cereal, how does that make me any more free? True, the quantum event is not one that could have been predicted sufficiently and completely by prior events, but it looks like, yet again, I'm still subject to causes in the ways that don't allow me to be the agent or author of my actions. So even if we live in a deterministic world, in an indeterministic world, it doesn't look like that's going to save us from the problem of freedom. Another way intuitively of putting this is, if you, for example, inhabited a deterministic planet, and then somehow miraculously were to move from that planet to a planet that was governed by quantum indeterminacy, in which at least not all events were deterministically predictable, it's not clear how moving from one planet to another would make you free if you weren't free on the deterministic planet. Why would moving to the indeterministic planet just by itself provide you with freedom? It looks like, if anything, it would just provide you with a certain amount of randomness in your behavior, but why should randomness be the same thing as freedom? That is to say, what I want to conclude from this discussion is, for now, perhaps we should set aside the issue of quantum indeterminacy and take a harder look at what would follow if we were in a purely deterministic world, and keep as a side background thought that it's not clear that acknowledging that we live in a not quite deterministic world is enough to solve the problem. So let's keep on forging ahead.